bastards!
2.
All right!
He is all that remains of a once powerful yokai.
Phew.
Hey!
Right now, you're on the threshold of amazing adventure.
Welcome to the Ultimate Academy for Gifted Juveniles. This 5-floor building, which is sealed inside a glass dome, doesn't actually have all that much information about it. Nonetheless, this academy was the location for the dreaded Killing School semester, ran by Headmaster Monokuma and aided by his 5 monocubs. During the Killing School semester, 16 students were meant to face the harsh reality that in order to escape this cursed place, they either had to be one of the last 2 remaining students or kill one of their peers and get away with their crime. As with something of this nature, there was a lot of killings at both the hand of the headmaster and the students themselves. This brings forth the question: which one of these deaths is the most brutal one of them all? The first thing I would like to address is the murders of the students. As far as brutality goes, there isn't any that really stick out over the executions. There are certainly some creepy ones and some heartbreaking ones, but none that actually outweigh what some of the students had to suffer after being caught in the class trials. Alright, so now that we've kind of slashed through the entirety of the murders in Danganronpa V3, we want to take a look at the executions. The executions we have in Danganronpa V3 are as follows. Alright, let me put my worst German accent on as possible so I can say this properly. Der Flawatsa, Kayede Akamatsu's execution, Strand of Agony, Kirumi Tojo's execution, Cultural Melting Pot, Korekyo Shinjuji's execution, Wild West Insecticide, Gonto Gokuhara's execution, and lastly, Blast Off, Second Ignition, Kaito Momota's execution. You may be wondering about Tsumugi and Kibo in the Ultimate Annihilation, but I don't really count it as much of an execution like the others, seeing as Kibo sacrificed himself to let the rest of the crew escape the Danganronpa set. Tsumugi also just gets crushed by a rock. I mean, come on, like, that's not really that brutal, right? Just plop. So, we can't really give it the title of most brutal death. So, which execution is the most brutal? To determine this, we must first eliminate the ones that don't really seem too harsh, which we already did with Tsumugi. Moving on from my incompetency, the first one to be eliminated is Blast Off, Second Ignition, which belonged to Kaito Momota, Luminary of the Stars. Instead of being punished by Monokuma's execution, Kaito fell victim to a sickness that was lingering inside him for quite some time before the execution started. This meant that even though he may have died mid-execution, he did not die to the execution, thus making his death a lot less brutal than it could have been. Kaito had also accepted his fate during the class trial and was completely ready to face his termination. The next one to be removed is Cultural Melting Pot, which belonged to Korekyo Shinjuji. Oh my god, Kyo. Oh my god. He was absolutely overjoyed when it came to his execution, and he was anticipating it the entire time. He wanted to face death. He wanted to be reunited with his sister he had fallen in love with before she passed away. He was lusting over his own death. I mean, how less cruel can that be? Like, you just like walk in and say, oh yeah, I want to die, thank you. And he would kill people anyway because he wanted to give his sister friends. So he'd kill women. Yeah, what an idiot. And while being thrown into a pot, be boiled alive is, cruel. Kyo saw the positives out of being killed rather than the negatives. The most brutal part about his death is that Monokuma and his sister's spirit banished his spirit to the afterlife, so he can't fuck his sister anymore. Nah. Suck on that, Kyo. Oh god. Whew. That whole chapter would just send shivers down my spine. Woo! Now, with there only being 3 executions left, it's easier for me to explain which one is the worst of them all. However, I still want to explain why the other 2 aren't as prominent as the most brutal one. The next one we're going to cross off is Strand of Agony, which belongs to Kirumi Tojo. This execution is rather tragic because Kirumi ultimately wants what's best for the nation of Japan. She is willing to try as hard as she could to serve her nation, even going as far as trying to get away with being the blackened. Ultimately, she failed, resulting in her execution. Unlike every other Danganronpa execution, Kirumi was seen running away from Monokuma and the class trial grounds to escape. This actually made it so Kirumi would commit most of her execution at her own will, as she was so determined to escape. In the end, even after all of her efforts to climb up a thorny vine to freedom, there was no light at the end of the tunnel, and she fell to her demise. This death is brutal, especially given the reasons, but her death was caused by falling, which isn't the absolute peak of brutality shown in this game. The last one to remove from taking the title of the most brutal death in Danganronpa V3 is Wild West Insecticide, which belonged to none other than Gonto Gokuhara. This execution was the result of that fucking stupid ass Kokichi manipulating Gonto during his time in the virtual world that Monokuma had developed and Miyu Iruma had altered. Miyu intended to murder Kokichi, an attempt to get out of the killing school semester by being not caught as the blackened at the next class trial. Little did Miyu know that Kokichi was aware of this plan and he used Gonto to thwart it. The reason why he needed to use Gonto was due to Miyu having programmed Kokichi's avatar to freeze had she have touched him. Not only this, but Gonto had also been subjected to a false memory from a flashback light to instigate the entire thing, as gaining that false memory had caused Gonto to break. So, not only do you have a broken, manipulated Gonto, but he also had put the headset on wrong, meaning that he had no recollection of what even happened in the virtual world. During the class trial, Gonto had no memory that he had murdered anyone. This broke Gonto down, as he had no intention of ever hurting any one of his classmates. All this, and I still haven't gotten into the execution. Gonto's execution had him and his alter ego tied to a pole, so that Monokuma could launch a bunch of robotic bugs at him. He is executed by a large robot insect, piercing through his stomach, and it is all finished by Monokuma flaming him alive, or dead. This leaves us with our most brutal execution in Danganronpa V3, which is, let's get the German back. Hopefully I say it right. The Flowatsa, which belongs to Kayede Akamatsu. Once again, the first execution, as a result of a class trial, is the most brutal in the entire game. Kayede was shaping up to be a symbol of hope for her fellow classmates. Her goal was for everyone to survive and allow for everyone to escape. To do this, she was provoked by Monokuma's time limit and tried to murder the mastermind so that everyone could escape. She had a close bond with Shuichi Saihara and told him that he had to face the truth no matter what before the class trial had started. And this was her downfall. She was found out to be the blackened in the first class trial for murdering Rentaro Amami, as she rolled a shot-put ball from the vent in the classroom down to the library, which struck Rentaro on the head. At least, that is what we were led to believe. The real culprit behind the murder of Rentaro was actually Tsumugi Shirogane. This means Kayede was executed under false claims and her life was terminated for no proper reason. I mean, kind of like the entire game, no one's really killed for no proper reason other than Monokuma, but we'll forget about that. Kayede's execution consisted of her being dragged away from the trial grounds by a chain coming and attaching itself to her neck. As she was being dragged, she reached out for Shuichi, probably due to being frightened and seeking out help. That wasn't going to save her though. She was then sent to a theater with a large piano in the center of it. Monokuma was seen as the conductor and instructed the Monocubs to pull on the rope that forced Kayede to swing back and forth across the piano. This put stress on her throat and caused her not to be able to breathe until she was eventually unable to struggle, which resulted in her death. Not only this, but the piano was closed on her, causing her blood to splatter across the place. So there you have it. The most brutal death in Danganronpa V3 belongs to none other than Kayede. It was fairly obvious that this would be the case after she didn't actually murder Rantaro. So she died just to cover up what Tsumugi did. Like in Trigger Happy Havoc, this one was very simple to determine, but I also wanted to look at the other ones just to see if my initial deductions were actually right. After being brutally tortured because of a false accusation, it's hard to justify anything else being able to remotely compete with it at all. So, this ends the most brutal deaths in Danganronpa series for now. I know there's Ultra Despair girls, but not many people die in there at all. I mean, a lot of the adults do, but like, there's no like full-fledged like murders and executions. So, yeah. I hope you've all enjoyed these videos. My name is Resin Unleashed, the resident who is now obsessed with Danganronpa, and I will catch you all next time.